And welcome back. We are studying Glimpses of God in chapter 6 of the Gospel of John. We are with Dr. John Pauline. And Dr. Pauline, after Jesus now feeds the 5,000, he then gives a discourse or a sermon of the bread of life. Tell us about that.
Right. Have you been to Galilee?
Yeah, I have actually.
You have. So you've seen the Sea of Galilee?
I've seen it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you picture in your mind, and maybe our viewers who haven't been there can picture a lake that's sort of teardrop shaped. And the wider part on the northeast side is where the feeding took place. He fed the 5,000. Even today, there's not a lot of people live there. It's sort of open land. And then they took the boat across the lake, and it's maybe 20 kilometers at the most. They took the boat across the lake and landed in Capernaum, which is on the northwest side of the lake. And you've been to the synagogue there, I suspect.
I think so, I have.
Which is pretty cool to stand in the synagogue, and there I love to read some of the stories here that happened in that very place. So he gives a sermon now in which he illustrates the parable of feeding the 5,000. You see, it's a story. All the gospel writers have it, but in John, it becomes an acted parable of Jesus as the bread of life. The bread that they were feeding on was to remind them of Jesus and who he really was and what he could do for them. This is a rich, rich chapter. I wish we could just read through it, but let me give a little bit of a foundation so that people can get a handle on it. It all goes back to Exodus 3:14. Because Jesus uses this phrase, I am. And in the Greek, it's a very emphatic, ego, eimi. It's really pointing back to Exodus 3:14. Could you read it?
And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you.
This is really the name of God. As close as you come to a name of God, he says, I am who I am. I am has sent you. And in the Greek, this is emphasized. I am could simply be a me, but here it's ego eimi. I am. And so the Greek phrase here evokes more than just, well, I'm coming over to see you today. You know, that's I am, but it's very basic. In the Gospel of John, Jesus uses I am in several ways. Some of it is just self-identification. You know, disciples are in the stormy boat, and they say, oh, who's that coming on the water? And Jesus, don't worry, it's me. You know, he says, ego eimi, it's me, don't worry. I'm not scary, I'm just the guy you know. You see? So that's a human level. But then he can also use it at a divine level. I am the bread of life. I am the resurrection and the life. And that points back to the Old Testament. I wish we had time to look at some of the texts. But in the Old Testament, God speaks in those terms. I am, water. I am life to you. So that language of I am is used in relation to other things. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the bread. I am the light. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the vine. You see, all these different ways. And the idea, when you hear that, it references back to the Old Testament prophets where Yahweh, God, uses I am with predicates. You see, these kinds of things. These are expressions of what God was offering Israel. Now Jesus uses these same expressions, and it's not just a cliche, but it's to remind them of the God of the Old Testament. Jesus is really claiming he can do for them what the God of the Old Testament was designed to do. But beyond that, Jesus even uses uses without predicate, which is really stunning. And the most remarkable of these is John 8:58. It's one of those Johannine misunderstandings where Jesus says something and people don't get it. Let's go to verse 56. John 8:56. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. That's a translator. The Greek says he rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. And what do they think? Oh, Jesus is claiming to be, 3,000 years old? says, "You are not yet 50 years old," the Jews said to him, "and you have seen Abraham?" Jesus says, "I tell you the truth. Before Abraham was, I am." I mean, there he is just nailing Exodus 3:14. And they, of course, understood him. They took up stones to stone him, and on that occasion he vanishes.
Yeah.
So he's clearly using this language to refer to his divinity. And so the I am statements in the Gospel of John point to who Jesus is.
Now, when reading these I am statements or expressions that Jesus, makes, for example, I am the bread, I am the light of the world, I am the door, and so on, the way, truth, life, and vine. It almost is difficult for the reader to say, well, what does that mean? Okay, so Jesus is the bread, but what does it mean to me? Jesus is the light. For example, in this room, we have so much light right now that, if Jesus says, I am the light, it would be difficult for me or for even anyone to just grasp that meaning that Jesus is the light. So help me understand, maybe today, how can I grasp that spiritual meaning and say, this is what it means to me?
Well, using the analogy you just brought up, I would say God can get our attention in two ways. He can turn up the light, or he can turn up the darkness. You see? Now, we are surrounded by bright lights. At home, we're surrounded by internet, television, all kinds of stuff, distractions. Life is busy, the office, everything's going on at the office. The only way God can get through us at such a time would be to turn up the light and make his presence really dramatic. Or he can turn up the darkness. And the way I think of it here, I am the bread of life. To understand what that really means, it might be helpful for somebody not to eat for 3 days. Let's say, for whatever reason, you couldn't eat for 3 days, and you come to a friend's house, and there's bread in the oven, and the bread is just finishing as you walk in the door. They're opening the door, and they're pulling out this fresh bread, and the aroma at that point, they cut a slice off. They put a little butter on it, hot, right into your hand. You haven't eaten in 3 days. You take a bite of that bread. That's what Jesus is all about. That's what I mean by turning up the darkness. In other words, if you did not experience food for 3 days, they say hunger is the best sauce. You see? So when we come to realize how deficient our daily life is, when God helps us to focus on that, when circumstances cause us to say, life is really tough, it's at moments like that when Jesus becomes precious to us. Or at other times, like I said, he turns up the light and turns up, the bread comes in such a form that we can't miss it as coming from him.
So those hardships moments, those moments of darkness in our lives where we sense, we realize our need of that light, that hunger that we have. We realize, because without, let's say we are filled or we have everything, then we really don't sense or understand what it is to have the light, the bread.
We trust in ourselves. We feel like we've got to fix our problems. And sometimes our ideas have to shipwreck before we're willing to actually take a good look at what God has to offer in Jesus Christ. And so the spiritual gospel is telling us, you got to take your eyes away from the distractions of this world, this desire to solve your own problems, to fix your own issues, and look a little deeper.
And so when God turns up that darkness, as you say, it is for our advantage.
That's
right.
It
is for our good.
And God doesn't even have to turn it up. Life will do that for us. But God can use that darkness when it comes to really get our attention for who Jesus really is. The bread of life, the door, the good shepherd, the water, the vine, etc. We need to learn to see Jesus in the ordinary things of every day. And that's what John is calling us to do. So in the synagogue of Capernaum, Jesus is giving this sermon, I am the bread of life, to show the delight. In those days, of course, bread was the primary thing to eat, so it meant everything that food meant to them. But here's the interesting thing. When Jesus is done with the sermon, look at verse 60, I think it is.
And we're back in chapter
6, yeah. John chapter 6 and verse 60.
Therefore, many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, "This is a hard saying. Who can understand it?" And that's what I'm saying, earlier today. How can I understand such, I'm the bread and the light and so on?
They were looking for a Messiah that would help them politically, would help them economically, would help them militarily. They were looking for a Messiah rooted in this world. John is saying the true life, the abundant life, the ultimate life is not grounded in this world. It is grounded beyond. And that's where the spiritual gospel comes in. The interesting thing is, at the end of this sermon, everybody leaves him. We think people are spiritual because they have lots of followers, because their ministry is big and powerful. We think spiritual work must be good if it has big numbers, big donations. When Jesus really got down to it, everybody left. And at the end of this chapter, he comes to the disciples and says, "Will you leave too?" And they said, "Well, we were thinking about it, but where would we go?" We don't know where else we would go. So it's almost like the disciples stayed because they couldn't come up with another option, you see, which in a sense is where we are too. When we realize that there is no other option, then we will turn to Jesus with all our hearts. But we love to hang on to our stuff. We love to hang on to our options, you see. And because of that, we don't connect with Jesus in the powerful way that John would encourage us to do.
It's almost like saying, well, having you, Jesus, is better than having no one at all.
Well, having Jesus makes you realize that every other option was no one at all, you see. And that's why we talked about weddings and bringing Jesus into the wedding. Because if we put our spouse ahead of Jesus, they could be gone tomorrow for a variety of reasons. But when Jesus is in that marriage, it raises it to another level.
And Dr. Pauline, I believe that Jesus is searching today for people who are in darkness, and he wants to shed that light into their hearts so that they can eventually give their lives to Christ and see that indeed they always needed that light and that bread. Friends, till next time, God bless.